Hey, hello, hi, welcome back to my channel. It is cold, it is dark, it is winter in England, and I have glasses, and I know that there's a reflection, and please forgive me for that.
I'm sorry.
But anyway, grab a cozy blanket, and if you are ready, buckle in. Written in 1951, Oscar Handlin's The Uprooted, the epic story of the great migrations that made the American people, has been referenced as the first legitimization of immigration studies in American history. Written by, quote, a Jew and the child of Jewish immigrants who hailed from Ukraine and settled in Brooklyn, end quote, Handlin's experience as a first-generation American influenced his writing about the ways in which America changed the immigrant just as much as the immigrant changed America. As a Pulitzer Prize-winning book, The Uprooted still holds merit as a modern study tool for both the form and understanding of the origins of American immigration studies, despite heavy criticism for being too generalized. Handlin, author of over 24 publications, was a professor at Harvard for nearly 50 years. As an American historian and a Jewish historian, Handlin, quote, shaped the field of American Jewish history, end quote. Though he tended to keep his American historical works separate from his Jewish historical works for most of his career. This bifurcation of identities permeated his works, going so far as to giving Jewish people little to, quote, no room for the experience of coming to the United States in the great century of migration, end quote, which kind of explains why he only mentions Jewish immigrants in passing throughout much of The Uprooted. Handlin may have believed that the Jewish migration experience may have stood in a class of its own, separate from the American immigrant experience, along with the Chinese and other Asiatic immigrants who received only a few pages of acknowledgement near the end of the book. When he published The Uprooted in 1951, Handlin was, quote, an active public intellectual, writing extensively upon pluralism and group life, civil rights, assimilation, and the problem of Jewish identity, and notably immigration reform for periodicals, journals, and books aimed at the general reader, end quote. The Uprooted earned the Pulitzer Prize in 1952 for its accessibility and vivid imagery. He was also politically active, not unlike the typical first-generation Americans that he wrote about. Handlin's opinion on various stages of immigration policy in The Uprooted begins relatively fair-minded, focusing on the requirement for an immigration tax on the incoming people, which he presents as nominal.
Yar, sometimes I wonder why I bother plundering at all.
In the closing chapters, specifically The Shock of Alienation, his distaste for the gatekeeping methods developed after the Spanish-American War in 1898 becomes pretty apparent, reflecting his concurrent works on immigration policy reform during the 1950s. Handlin discusses various attempts at barring free-flow immigration into the country, beginning with, quote, debates over the Negro, the Chinese, and the Filipino, end quote, then deliberating the popularity of the concept of eugenics, and on through to the enactment of the literacy test implemented in 1917. In 1921 and 1924, the quota system, which he was actively trying to dismantle in the 1950s, were put into effect, systems he, quote, emphatically believed had to go, end quote. As such, he was active as a consultant to the President's Commission on Immigration and Naturalization under President Truman, and acted as an advisor to Senator Herbert Lehman, the leading advocate for immigration reform in the 1950s. Handlin joined other immigration scholars of his time by focusing primarily on European immigrants, quote, such as Carl Wittke, who wrote on the Germans, Theodore Blagan on the Norwegians, and George Stevenson on the British, end quote. What sets Handlin apart from his contemporary immigration historians was his revolutionary approach to the subject. In the introduction, he opens, quote, once I thought to write a history of the immigrants in America. Then I discovered that the immigrants were American history. I have written, as others have written, of the impact of the immigrant upon the society which received him. In this work, however, I wish to regard the subject from an altogether different point of view. Immigration altered America, but it also altered the immigrants, end quote. The Uprooted made Handlin one of the, quote, very first American historians who recognized the contribution that sociology could make to history, end quote. Handlin perpetuated the idea that historians should utilize, quote, sociological concepts to organize vast materials, to place innumerable details into a larger frame, end quote, which he accomplished by creating generalized models of immigrants and peasants in the book. Among the criticisms directed at The Uprooted, 2 points in particular made the most repeat appearances. overgeneralization, and the decision to forego traditional historical documentation. One of the most referenced critical reviews of The Uprooted was written in 1964 by Rudolph J. Vicoli, who used the example of the contadino, or Italian peasant, vast difference in experience to discredit Handlin's model peasant. His critique stated that Handlin failed to take into account the unique cultural differences and varied ethnic groups by assigning all of the immigrants to farmer from a small village. As such, his honestly scathing review concluded that Handlin's description of the immigration and adjustment processes are inherently flawed and therefore pretty dang useless.
Hate, 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 double hate.
Loathe entirely.
Historians Alan Kraut and John Hyam acknowledge the shortfall of Handlin's generalization for simplification. However, Kraut posits that, quote, scholars of the future need not agree with Handlin or embrace his generalizations or confine themselves to a specific history. Instead, they should follow him and offer their own answers to the questions he raised in his works, end quote. With regards to Handlin's decision to forego in-text citations as well as a proper bibliography, Kraut states that Handlin's omission of citations lent his book to be interpreted as a saga, which served primarily to draw scrutiny in an era where specificity was the primary focus of historians. Though Handlin does acknowledge this decision, as well as provide a handful of specific references in his 2-page acknowledgments at the end, the desire for historians like myself and the historians referenced in Kraut's article to research references as they arise is pretty seriously curtailed.
It's thought to contain a Playfair cipher suggesting contact with Laboulaye, who will hide written into the Booth diary page that Thomas tried to burn.
The one we have.
Exactly.
Additionally, Handlin admits that some of his quotations, though taken from the source materials listed, were, quote, not quoted verbatim, end quote. The irony. Making any post-consumption research attempts on the part of the reader all the more difficult. However, these criticisms don't condemn The Uprooted to the discard pile. As Rothman explores in his review, Handlin offers an important lesson to historians even today, nearly 40 years after Rothman's own review was published. What makes The Uprooted so valuable is the marriage of sociology and historiography together, serving as a goal for the historians lost in the particularism that was so popular in the early 1980s, which has evolved into the extreme specifications and specializations of today. Generalizations, as Vicoli implied in his review, can unceremoniously dismiss the events and experiences of whatever groups are least represented by the generalized peasant. However, focusing too strongly on the branches of the trees will lead the historian to lack recognition of the proverbial forest of trends and other wide-scope subjects. While The Uprooted does present a kind of overgeneralized representation of the Eurocentric immigrant, the ability to find and present commonalities among the many primary and secondary resources is an invaluable skill that appears to be declining. Additionally, the extremely academic style of writing that became prominent in the 1970s is to blame for the disconnect between, quote, the lay and professional audiences, end quote, allowing popular historians to present unsound history to thrive in the place of thorough but dry works of professional historians. For this, The Uprooted, along with Handlin's many other publications intended for general consumption, should be returned to academic study. Though I don't personally agree with the lack of in-text documentation, his vivid and poetic writing engages both the professional and amateur alike, giving merit to his method of historical writing. The Uprooted was an attempt by Handlin to set into words the experiences of the population that surrounded him growing up in New York. Being a first-generation American in a city brimming with immigrants during what is sometimes referred to as the Great Immigration Era, which is 1850 to the 1920s, Handlin was able to pull from both documented sources and from the immigrants surrounding his boyhood home. His emotionally charged imagery and his embracing of his subjectivity made The Uprooted uniquely accessible, allowing the book to provide education through entertainment for the general population that had come to enjoy his many serials and periodicals. His work drew criticism, both in his use of the model peasant, which was sometimes too general, glossing over the varieties of experiences to develop the average experience, and his decision to forego traditional historical documentation, doesn't take away from the fact that The Uprooted remains a paradigm of accessible literary styling paired with organizational methods commonly enjoyed by social scientists. The Pulitzer Prize-winning book maintains relevance by making sense of large data sets in the name of greater understanding, which is an invaluable contribution in modern historical and historiographical study. Thank you again for joining me. I know, the glasses, they make filming terrible, but I can see so much better. I'll figure out some sort of scheme to make this look nicer. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video, please consider leaving me a like. Maybe consider subscribing, it is free. And joining me as I continue on my ride of sharing these interesting, to me at least, historical facts and research projects. I really enjoy doing these, and I hope you guys had fun. When this video is over, there's going to be a screen that's going to provide you easy access to all of my other videos that are like this. It's a whole playlist of them, as well as whatever YouTube thinks is going to be the most fitting for you. I hope that I will see you all in the next one. So until then, bye! As such, he was an active, damn it.